We've got everybody checked in and ready to roll.
Go ahead, you're open to both.
3,
Put it over to the slate now.
2, 1. Take camera 1. Go, John.
Welcome to the Washington Post.
Welcome to Washington Post Live. I'm Leanne Caldwell.
I'm Yasmin Abu Talib.
I'm David Ignatius.
That was quite an intro. My gosh, we should probably just leave it right there.
I've hit the big time. Washington Post. I can go home and tell my parents what I did today.
Between Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Washington Post Live itself, we are now reaching hundreds of thousands of homes across all 50 states.
The power of this platform is it takes people into the world of ideas.
Audience members of Washington Post Live are part of the conversation.
I would like to ask the audience, how many of you knew before today's event that heart disease was the #1 killer of women? Okay, just me. Whether it's with cancer scientists or politicians.
This panel, I think, was originally called, 2 women against Putin. It really should be 3 women against Putin. So
the better way to get things done, as I've demonstrated, is by putting a group together and negotiating something that's good for both points of view.
So tell me what your plan is.
Oh, we have lots of plans.
I think Washington Post Live offers journalists like me a new way to do our job.
Their work is hugely important.
A new way to connect with our audience.
Hello, Senator Schumer. Welcome to the Washington Post. This is going to be fun.
A new way to deepen our engagement with people who care about the Washington Post and our mission of gathering news.
The Washington Post also said that we were the best film of the year, so that was pretty cool as well.
Yes, well, I mean, the Washington Post doesn't lie, Jeffrey. You know that.
I'm still having a lot of fun, Kat. Like, a lot of fun.
And their individuality comes through more so than just their title.
Thank you for being the agents and the warriors of the light and truth.
That is the lock from the night of the burglary.
Jeff Bezos bought it at an auction.
Right.
And we're trying to find out how much Bezos paid.
Right. Come back next week.
I'm so grateful to be on a platform like the Washington Post. I subscribe, I read, I love the Washington Post.
Thank you.
We need films like this. So thank you very much. Stephen, Lynn, it's been great to talk to you.
And I'm quite honored that the Washington Post should want to talk with me. Thank you.
I cannot thank you all enough.
Hello and welcome. I'm Susie Watford, and I'm the new Chief Strategy Officer here at the Post. As our world becomes more digitised, the significance of protecting our systems, networks and programmes from cyber attacks cannot be overstated. Cybersecurity is critical in safeguarding our economic vitality, national security, and of course, everyday life. Recent ransomware attacks on the US healthcare system that potentially put lives at risk underscores the stakes of the issue. The various motivations for cyber disruption have expanded, and geopolitics has become an increasingly more important part of the equation. So first up today, we have a conversation with Kemba Walden, former acting US National Cyber Director. Intelligence and National Security reporter Shane Harris will talk to her about the recent cyber attacks on the healthcare system. Then we have America's first cyber diplomat, Nathaniel Fick, will sit down with David Ignatius to discuss the State Department's new cyber strategy and why he has said foreign policy is tech policy. The Post's Ellen Nakashima will speak with retired General Paul Nakasone, the former head of US Cyber Command and the National Security Agency, about the future of cyber warfare. And we will also have a special presentation from Drew Bagley, Vice President and Counsel of Privacy and Cyber Policy at CrowdStrike, about the next frontiers in strategic cyber risk mitigation. And our special thanks to CrowdStrike for sponsoring today's event. And with that, my colleague Shane Harris will be up here after this video to kick off today's conversations. Thank you again for joining us and for your support of the Post. Thank you.
I know this. If we banned ransomware payments today, we could bankrupt the very small and medium-sized businesses that the American economy relies upon. Think rural hospitals that serve 4 or 5 municipalities. Those can go bankrupt. What we need to do is prepare for the worst, prepare those organizations to be more resilient against a ransomware attack.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Washington Post. I'm Shane Harris. I cover intelligence and national security here. I'm very pleased to be joined today by Kemba Walden, who you just saw in the video, president of Paladin Global Institute, former acting national cyber director at the White House, someone who has worked for many years really at the heart of cybersecurity issues throughout the government. So we're really pleased to have you here today. Thanks for coming.
Thank you for the invitation.
I want to start by hearing your thoughts about this hack on Change Healthcare, a unit of United Healthcare Group that we saw here in the intro video. This is, an attack that hurt providers, patients, and really compromised the healthcare industry nationwide. Outside of the scale of that event, which was huge, what struck you as notable about this latest cyber attack?
Well, Shane, thank you for having me here. And the healthcare industry is really something that I personally care about. We all personally care about, but I'm the daughter of a doctor that owned a clinic, a nephrology clinic for decades. The two things that struck me the most is that this got in the way of access to healthcare for individuals. It got in the way of providers being able to provide that healthcare to individuals. That's the first thing, the well-being of people and the impact it had. The second is a little bit more wonky, but it's what happens in the cracks. What are the things that we're not really engaging on? The healthcare industry has become a corporate entity, corporate structure, of a corporate ecosystem that engages in mergers and acquisitions, and it's in those mergers and acquisitions, in the cracks, where we find some vulnerabilities. And not paying attention and tending to those cracks, I think, is alarming.
And there have been some that say that the scale of this kind of attack shouldn't have surprised, the industry, right? And you've been testifying about these things and working on these issues for a long time. A recent survey showed that U.S. healthcare organizations allocate an average of 7% of spending to cybersecurity, whereas the average amount spent across sectors is 11 to 12%. So there's about a 4 or 5% differential there. Is the healthcare sector allowing itself to be a target by underinvesting in cybersecurity, or is what we're seeing here more that they are a target because what they do, as you've just said, is so valuable and indispensable to ordinary Americans?
I think it's both and. I think it's the healthcare industry hasn't been paying enough attention to its digital infrastructure. I mean, that's clear. We've seen that. It's also that the healthcare industry operates on data that is valuable. And while ransomware actors and other nation-state actors and organized criminals are opportunistic by nature, there's value in that data, but that data is sort of the engine for the healthcare system to be able to work the way it's organized now. And we haven't been paying enough attention to securing that data and the infrastructure it flows upon in a way that allows us to really consider the implications of a nation-state attack on that system. It's really the well-being of people, the access to healthcare, that makes it target-rich.
And I would think if you were a healthcare provider, you're a doctor, you're a children's doctor, you're not sitting around worrying about data security. No. I mean, this must seem to so many healthcare providers and clinicians, and even at a hospital level, like somebody else's problem, right? Or how do we because I've been writing about cybersecurity for 20 years now, and there's always that question of how do you get the people in charge to realize, no, security is something that you have to invest in. I mean, what are your thoughts on that and how that's playing out in healthcare? And I would imagine events like this are bringing it home for people.
Making it acute.
Yeah.
Providers, like you said, they are brilliant, they care, they're there to do one thing, and that is to save and improve human life, human well-being. Managed healthcare has become an industry now over the last few decades, and that's a whole different policy conversation. But managed healthcare, they're providing digital services too. They are tech companies. United Healthcare is a tech company. And so as a tech company, they have to think of themselves as the responsible party for protecting patient data and services to enable access to healthcare. These are tech companies now, and we need to treat them that way. Change Healthcare is a payment system, right? We need to treat them that way. We need to start helping hospitals, helping providers, but the tech companies that manage the services, that manage the healthcare in between, to become cybersecurity professionals, full stop. We need to be able to give rural hospitals the resources that they need in order to be able to employ managed service providers or cybersecurity or cloud service providers, giving them the training that they need in order to be able to look at vendor contracts in a particular way, in a way that they're not used to looking at, giving them the resources that they need to be able to deploy endpoint detection and explaining what that is and why it's important. We need to be able to fan out into those rural areas, into those areas that provide healthcare services to the most needy, the under-invested communities possible, and help them to become cybersecurity professionals, because it's sort of one and the same. It's another tool to enable the delivery of healthcare service.
Is that ultimately a matter of educating people there or getting more people with those skills to take those jobs in those rural facilities?
It's a matter of training and resources, right? You can have a plan, you need a plan, but without resources, without adequate training, you don't have much more, right? So we need to incentivize people to get out there and become cybersecurity professionals for healthcare systems and to retain those trained professionals. We know in the cybersecurity space, we tend to move in and out, private sector, public sector, large companies, small companies. I'm a good example of that. Yeah. But the more people we can have out there that understand the intricacies of the healthcare system and understand how to secure data and the information networks that the data flows on, the better off we are system-wide.
Right. So you mentioned resources, so that's money. Let's talk policy. Let's talk Congress. Yeah. You saw the film there of you testifying. What do you want to see from legislators on this? And do you think there's appropriate concern and recognition on the Hill about this threat? I mean, we've all seen plenty of testimony with members of Congress who don't necessarily seem the most technologically savvy. Obviously, their staff are neck deep on this issue. But is there recognition on the Hill that this is a problem? And what concrete steps would you like to see now that would go towards addressing the threat?
I do think there's recognition on the Hill. I think there has been for some time. I mean, I'm a lawyer, so I'm sorry I'm about to get into it. But
in Washington, there's plenty of it.
Yeah, there's plenty of us, so you're used to it now. The Cybersecurity Act of 2015 did a couple of things. One, it created the Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act, which is a thing I dealt with when I was a lawyer at DHS. But the other thing it did was to tell the healthcare industry that they needed to start focusing on digital security. And so at the end of last year, Health and Human Services, along with the Health Sector Coordinating Council and the public health sector, published a set of voluntary cybersecurity standards in a couple of technical notes. Some for small hospital, rural healthcare systems, and others for medium and large size systems. I mention that because something that Congress can do is to codify some of those. It's called the hiccup, these documents, if you're looking for them. Codify some of those, if not all of those, voluntary requirements. Make it a minimum cybersecurity standard required of all healthcare systems. And then once you make the system defensible, enforce defending it. And then cause hospitals to continuously develop resilience.
What is the resistance towards making those voluntary guidelines mandatory?
I think there are a couple of things. Some of them are political. It's hard to get consensus these days, unfortunately, in Congress. I think that's a challenge. And so in order to start working on making those systems defensible, we do need a voluntary system now, because we can't wait. There might be some pressure against the costs associated with mandatory minimum cybersecurity requirements. So if Congress creates mandatory requirements, Congress also needs to appropriate the right authorities to be able to give maybe grant-making authority to rural hospitals, to be able to deploy some of those minimum standards, to be able to employ the right people to deploy those minimum standards in those systems. So it takes both a requirement, some funding, maybe through the grant-making process, and then enforcement.
And I would think we were talking about big healthcare systems at the top, but these rural, under-resourced, undefended places are the weak link in the chain, right? I mean, do you hear from rural hospitals? I mean, are they clamoring to say, look, we want to do this, but we're under-resourced. You got to give us some help here to do this.
Yes. I mean, the rural healthcare, and I'm not going to talk just about rural healthcare, but clinicians that can be in urban centers that are underinvested too. They want to provide services to patients. They want to improve the well-being of patients. They want to improve access to healthcare, and they recognize that part of it is to make sure that their networks and systems don't fail, but they don't have the right resources, they don't have the right training, and they're seeking it out and begging for it. And sometimes it's just too expensive to do it.
And is it a matter too of the recruiting the right IT talent? I mean, do people who train in these areas want to go live in bigger cities generally, and is it harder to get them to want to go to these other places?
Yeah, we need to develop carrots to be able to do that. I mean, you become a cybersecurity professional, and the market's pretty good for cybersecurity right now. You go to a small rural hospital, get the right training, and then you're recruited immediately. It's the same story across industry.
Right.
That's the challenge.
I want to talk about incentives here too. The White House has said in a statement that I'm quoting here, strongly discourages paying of ransoms to stop the flow of funds to these criminals and disincentivize their attacks, which I think makes sense. I mean, people talk about, not negotiating with terrorists, not negotiating with kidnappers. We all know that many cyber insurance companies do suggest paying if data backups are not available. United Health seems to have acknowledged that they paid $22 million to a Russian-speaking ransomware gang. So did United set a dangerous precedent here? Do companies in general do that? How do you view this trade-off between what levers are there to raise the cost for hackers? Are we just incentivizing it and creating a market for them because they know these companies are going to pay and have the money to pay?
Yeah, so that is a tough business decision. I mean, you saw the CEO of United Health Group say that this was a horrible day for him to make that decision, and I believe him.
Yeah.
That's a really tough business decision. I would like us to get to a point where paying ransom is the last option, that you have a system that's resilient, that you have downtime that's short. Ransomware operators are business entrepreneurs.
Right.
I mean, it's organized crime syndicate, but they are business entrepreneurs. There are social institutions that underline this criminal business activity. They know that they can put pressure on the CEO of a large company by causing the resilience infrastructure to fall, right? So backups are being encrypted before the sensitive high-value data is encrypted for that reason. And that's what we saw in Change Healthcare. That's what we see across the industry. We need to get to a point where we're building in resilience, not only making our systems more defensible and then defending them, but building in resilience so that downtime is short, so that paying a ransom becomes a last option. We need to get there so that we put this criminal organized crime to rest, so that they go and find something else to do, essentially, or we lock them up.
Use their skills somewhere else.
Yeah.
Well, Kemba Walden, this is a great discussion. It's a great way to set the table for what's coming up next. Thank you very much for spending some time with me and for being here.
Thank you, Shane.
Thank you. And my colleague David Ignatius will be up next with Nathaniel Fick, America's first cyber ambassador, after this video. So please stay tuned.
overarching theory of the case here is that no country, no company, not the United States, the home to the greatest number of global technology companies in the world, nobody can go it alone here. And the sort of tagline that was ringing in our ears as we were developing the concept was a line from Ben Franklin during the American Revolution. And he said, "We must hang together or surely we shall hang separately."
So, welcome. I'm David Ignatius, a columnist for The Post. I'm delighted to be able to moderate this conversation with my longtime friend, Nate Fick, who is Ambassador at Large for Cyberspace and Digital Policy at the State Department. Ambassador, welcome to the Washington Post.
Good to be here, David. Thank you.
So let's start with something that's in the news. 2 days ago, Microsoft disclosed that Russia has been trying to disrupt the 2024 Olympics in Paris, including a disinformation film called Olympics Has Fallen that has a fake AI-generated voice impersonating Tom Cruise. I'd love to hear that. Tell us about the campaign, what else you know, and what else you see coming as the Olympics, this big global gathering, is just ahead of us.
I think there are a few trend lines that I would point to in addition to the specific headline. One is the pace of Russian hybrid activity in Europe is certainly increasing in the digital domain, but also other things like moving those buoys on the Narva River in Estonia. For instance, I was in Estonia last week. That was very much a topic of conversation. So I think we're going to see more of this kind of Russian meddling in ways that are disruptive, that violate our norms, that really are fundamentally unacceptable, and that are calibrated to stay generally below the threshold of the use of force. So that's narrative or trend line one. The second is how important it was that this Russian activity was quickly attributed and multilateralized. So it's not that long ago that attribution of technical interference was actually pretty tough to do technically. That's migrated to being primarily a political challenge. And I think we, NATO, have learned that when we can publicly attribute and we can do it in a multilateral way, it's more effective.
Just say a word about how Microsoft did this and about what Microsoft's disclosure tells us about the growing partnership between private sector in the U.S. and other parts of the world and governments.
You know, I think one of the silver linings to the very dark cloud that is the war in Ukraine has been a material strengthening of public-private partnerships on cybersecurity and digital issues broadly, exemplified in many ways by the partnership between the U.S. government and Microsoft in some key ways. The migration of the Ukrainian government enterprise to the cloud before the further invasion, the feedback sharing and threat intelligence sharing loop among the Ukrainian government, the US government, and Microsoft and other technology companies in order to blunt Russian cyber attacks in Ukraine. And this is yet another example where often the first line of defense and also the first line of detection is sitting in the private sector. And so the government actually relies quite a bit on those partnerships in order to figure out what's going on and move quickly.
Do you worry with this growing partnership, you could even argue dependence on private sector companies, about what would happen if Microsoft decided, for whatever reason, shareholder pressure, changing business climate, to pull the plug? What happens then?
I worry about everything, David.
Great.
I think, look, broadly speaking, we need in this world where digital issues inevitably are going to span government and the private sector. We need public-minded business executives. We need people serving in government who have some technical expertise and some commercial sensibility. I think it's essential that we avoid monopolies wherever we can. In technology areas where there's only one provider, you end up with a much kind of scratchier relationship and more risk. But the partnership with Microsoft in particular has been so robust. I think that this kind of collaboration is at this point in the DNA of the business.
So before we turn away from this question of disinformation, I want to ask you, at a time when our national debate is as polarized as ever, in particular on the question of Gaza, but also obviously the trial of former President Trump in New York. What evidence do you see of foreign government efforts to make that polarization even worse, to drive wedges deeper?
One thing that strikes me is, after a couple of years in this role, is I don't think most American citizens really viscerally understand how much of the content they see on social platforms is actually a foreign intelligence operation. I just don't think we viscerally get it. How much of what we see is bot generated or foreign intelligence service generated. So it's Daniel Patrick Moynihan said, you're entitled to your own opinions, but not to your own facts. And some shared understanding of the facts, even though we disagree about them or about the implications of them, we have to have a shared understanding of the facts. This notion of information integrity and a shared context around what's factual and what's not is the lifeblood of democratic representative government. So in my little purview, something that we try to make very clear to Russia, to China, to others on a consistent basis is that we view any kind of interference in our democratic process as dangerous, as escalatory, and as unacceptable.
And let me just push this a little further on the immensely painful, difficult question of the Gaza war. Have you seen foreign governments attempting to exacerbate differences in the United States?
Yes, unequivocally, across multiple platforms and multiple vectors.
So that's a chilling takeaway for me. Let's turn to something else that's been in the news. Sort of groundbreaking talks on AI with China in Geneva last month. I think we'd all love to hear your summary of what the agenda for those talks was and what in that first encounter on this very deep, important subject matter you were able to accomplish.
I think the theory of the case there goes back to Woodside and the president's meeting with President Xi and a mutual commitment that they made to open a channel on AI, given how foundational it is to so much of our national security, but also to potentially solving some significant global challenges like weather forecasting and climate modeling and medical diagnostics and these kinds of things. I went with Secretary Blinken to Beijing about a month ago, a week or so before the talks in Geneva, and we reaffirmed our commitment to do our part in opening that dialogue. The dialogue itself was focused on AI risk and safety, particularly with regard to frontier systems, the most advanced AI systems. And we traded our perspectives on governance, on the proper uses of AI. And look, I think we have quite different views in some key regards. The United States, in all technology areas, is committed to a multi-stakeholder model that has a robust role for the private sector. It has a robust role for civil society organizations. We're committed to rights-respecting uses of technology. We have kind of societal norms around privacy that simply don't exist in the PRC. So my view is that diplomacy is most important exactly when it's most difficult. Just sitting around and talking about comfortable topics with your friends can be fun, but it's not always useful. Having these kinds of channels and these kinds of dialogues is useful, and so we committed to doing it again.
So I'm curious whether your goal as you continue this process is to seek rules of the road that would be shared or simply to maintain dialogue.
Aspirationally, of course, the goal is some shared sense of rules of the road. After the release of ChatGPT in November of 2022, the US quickly moved to take a leadership role on these issues. Every government in the world was trying to figure out what to do. The White House started with voluntary commitments. Voluntary was important because voluntary is fast, and given the pace of evolution of the technology, we needed to get the first step of a governance approach in place quickly. Voluntary also matters because it, by definition, doesn't constrain innovation. The companies are agreeing to do it. So we started with the voluntary commitments. We ported the DNA, really, of those commitments into the G7. They became the bedrock of the International Code of Conduct for AI Developers at the G7. And they also formed the basis for our work at the UN. The US introduced a resolution in the General Assembly on artificial intelligence. It was ultimately co-sponsored by 123 states, including China, and passed by consensus. And read the language. It really locks in some important ways, the sort of view that our like-minded partners have about the future of tech. So if it's possible to bring every country in the world along with that kind of approach, great. And if it's not, and I think it's probably naive to think that that will be easy, then we will commit to maintaining the dialogue so that we have a channel to discuss our differences.
So there are some cynical observers who say that the reason the Chinese were willing to talk about AI is that they're behind the United States. And so they want to learn what they could about where we are. You're our ambassador for digital policy. You have the broad overview. Where are the U.S. and China in this technological competition on large language models, on quantum computing, on biotech? Are we ahead, behind, even? What's your judgment?
I mean, rather than let me make a sort of political pronouncement about where I think we are, which country in the world is the largest, most popular destination for entrepreneurs who want to build businesses in these spaces? Which country in the world is the destination of the largest amount of venture capital and private equity investment in these areas? It's the United States. This is still the place that people want to come in order to build great businesses. And ultimately, that's the most powerful arrow in our quiver. And so I think that if you believe that tech innovation as a source of national power is foundational, and I believe that with every fiber of my being, that traditional measures of strength like GDP or like military capacity are more and more downstream, actually, of a nation or a coalition and economy's ability to innovate in these core technology areas. If you believe that, then innovation has to remain our North Star, because we're in the early innings of a significant competition to see whose operating system becomes the dominant one in the world in these areas. And if those of us who are committed to things like representative government and free markets and equal treatment of all people need a generally rights-respecting operating system to prevail.
So let's step back a bit and talk about your job, which was an unusual and innovative thing for the State Department to do. You're the first ambassador at large for cyberspace and digital policy. What's your mandate in that job, and how should we, as observers, measure your success or lack of success in the job?
Fair question. Every nickel we spend is a taxpayer nickel. So yes, we have to be evaluated against some clear criteria. I'll give you a few. When Secretary Blinken first called me about the job, he said that the mission, and I'm pleased to say that 2.5 years later, 3 years later, the mission hasn't changed. He said the mission was to integrate and elevate our approach to tech diplomacy. He said tech is increasingly central to our foreign policy and increasingly inextricable from every element of our foreign policy. It's part of every bilateral relationship, it's part of every multilateral forum, and it's part of every functional topic from human rights to arms control to climate change. And so our mission was to ensure that the State Department is ready for that and has the people in the organization in order to operate effectively in that world and to ensure American leadership in that world. So that's meant a couple of things for us. We've built this new bureau focused on cybersecurity policy, digital freedom, and critical and emerging technology. So we're trying to build a team of experts within the department. But that's not enough. The real work of diplomacy in the State Department happens out in the world. It happens at the 200 American missions around the globe. And so we set an objective of having a trained cyber and digital officer at every mission around the world by the end of this year. We're more than on track to meet that goal. We've succeeded on Capitol Hill in getting a dedicated fund for cyber, digital, and emerging tech assistance. Now it's up to us to deploy it well. So I think the key metrics are whether American diplomats are up to the task, whether we are re-engaging fulsomely in the multilateral fora where these issues get decided. And I think there's pretty ample evidence in the last couple of years that things are moving strongly in the right direction.
So in rolling out this new portfolio, you issued a sort of foundational strategy document last month. And in that document, in its preface, it says, and I'll quote, "Central to our strategy is the effort to build digital solidarity among partners and allies." Explain what that means.
Digital solidarity is the organizing principle of that strategy, of the U.S. international cyberspace and digital strategy. And it recognizes that none of us, as that quote actually, that video clip that was shown when we sat down, we can't do it alone. We simply can't. No country can do it alone. Not even the United States with all of its wealth and all of its power and prestige and its innovation economy. We can't do it alone. These technologies are transnational. They intrinsically cross borders. In fact, if they're not operating at global scale, they lose much of their power. Their very power comes from being transnational. Companies, in order to succeed, want the biggest possible markets. They want harmonized regulation. They want common standards, interoperable standards. And so digital solidarity means acknowledging that and linking arms with our partners, with allies, and building the biggest possible tent that we can. It means actually not forcing a choice in a tech ecosystem globally that might be fragmenting and balkanizing. It's not the future we wanted, but it's the future we're getting. And if that happens, if it continues, we want our piece of it to be as big as possible. And fundamentally, that's digital solidarity.
So to unpack that, what I hear you saying is that to make this solidarity as big and powerful as possible, some countries that are not democracies but that are advanced and friendly, the United Arab Emirates, Singapore would be some examples, not democratic in the American sense. You want to be open to them being on our team, broadly speaking. Is that a fair way to put it?
I think the United States, of course, stands for, represents, and advocates for the kind of bedrock value of democratic participation around the world. And in some of these key technology areas, yes, we are going to have key partners who may have slightly different forms of governance than we do. And I think it is pragmatic and wise for us to leave room to ensure that we can work closely with them.
So at the same time that you're pursuing your mandate and your strategy, Russia continues what has been a very aggressive effort through the United Nations primarily to write new rules for cyberspace. I've written about this a half dozen times over the last few years. And they just keep coming at it. It's like the fox just is determined to try to guard the chicken coop. And there's a new effort that they just cranked up at the United Nations, and you're nodding. You've probably seen this same information I have. So they seem to have, from my judgment, growing people who were sort of seem sympathetic to their broad, inclusive-sounding formulations, and are close to having, or may already have, a majority of the General Assembly ready to back their approach. Is that right, first? And second, if it is, what do we do about it?
So 3 things there. I think you are absolutely right that Russia and China, but we can focus on Russia here, have been engaged in an everywhere and all the time kind of campaign in all these multilateral organizations, and particularly at the United Nations, to set the rules of the road in tech. And you were focused on it early. My very first diplomatic trip when I started this job was to go to Romania to whip votes in the final hours before the election of the Secretary General of the International Telecommunications Union, probably the most important international organization that most people are unfamiliar with. And that election was extraordinary. It was an American citizen, international civil servant, Doreen Bogdan-Martin, running against a former Russian deputy minister of communications who before that was a Huawei executive. It was like a comic book script. And Doreen won, and she won in a landslide. And she won in a landslide partly because of American engagement with so many of those middle ground states who perhaps needed a little bit fuller understanding of what Russian dominance of the ITU would mean. Another example of it is the open-ended working group in the first committee at the UN, where the the keeper of the framework for responsible state behavior in cyberspace. We are trying to transition the open-ended working group to a new mechanism, a program of action. The resolution in support of that, the vote in support of that transition garnered 161 votes, 2/3 of the General Assembly. And that was for a pretty strongly, American and like-minded position. I'll give you one other example, which is the AI resolution that we introduced with 123 co-sponsors that passed with unanimous consent. So yes, the Russians and others are engaging hard in these multilateral fora because they really matter. It is, in fact, where the rules of the road get written. I don't think that they are having the success that they want to have. And what does it mean going forward? It means we can't rest on our laurels. Look, I'm a military officer and CEO by background. I hesitate. You'd be hard-pressed to find anybody more frustrated with the UN and multilateral process than me. It is slow. It is clunky. It results in suboptimal outcomes. And it is absolutely essential. Because just like nature abhors a vacuum, when the United States pulls back, as we are so often tempted to do because of how clunky it can be, our adversaries fill the void.
So that's a good place to end. I just would note that Ambassador Fick and so many people are actually out there in these regulatory trenches around the world. Hard to imagine, sitting through plenary sessions of subgroups in the International Telecommunications Union, but they're doing it, and it makes a difference. So, Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us today.
Great to be here.
Thanks to all of you.
Good to be with you.
Sheriff, I got this.
Protecting your business from cyber attacks can be unrelenting. Today's adversaries move fast. CrowdStrike moves faster. CrowdStrike. We stop breaches.
Good afternoon. It's great to be here, and it was great to hear from my friends Ambassador Fick and Kemba Walden in that last session. Building off of those conversations, today I want to talk about a topic that I think is really the next cybersecurity policy challenge for us all, and that's ecosystem level challenges in cybersecurity. In an era of exciting possibilities fueled by technological innovation, devices, networks, and data are interconnected in a vast digital ecosystem. This means that what organizations build in this ecosystem affect other organizations, for better or for worse. Today, we are at an inflection point when it comes to the cyber policy challenges, to the resiliency of our digital ecosystem, and to the cyber policy solutions needed to address them. Year after year, there are significant cyber incidents perpetrated by nation-state actors affecting government agencies and our national security. These incidents target specific agencies and significant government data repositories to further strategic geopolitical aims. So what are today's ecosystem-level problems? The pattern is all too familiar. A high-profile cyber incident is discovered, and in the midst of an investigation, it is revealed that a nation-state actor has leveraged long-standing vulnerabilities in ubiquitous IT architecture to achieve a jarring level of system access. To make matters worse, there are often indications that an adversary has been in the victim's network for a long time. Yet, if the victim lacked a resilient cybersecurity program to begin with, then there generally isn't enough logging to tell the full story. How long was the adversary dwelling? Was it a month, months, a year, years? The lingering questions leave defenders alarmed not only at the known impact of cyber incidents, but importantly at the unknown impact, the long-term consequences of each cyber incident. We've seen some deeply disruptive breaches over the past few years. What stands out most, however, is how much worse some could have been. For every breach where the threat actor's motivation was espionage, even those that required complex remediations, there could have been a much worse scenario. Indeed, recent breaches could have been catastrophic. Under different geopolitical circumstances, adversaries might have deployed wipers or ransomware-like attacks across thousands or tens of thousands of possible victims. Consequently, impact to the victims was determined by the prerogative of the adversary, not any particular limitation to their access, resources, or know-how. Such access is a key component in adversaries' pre-positioning for future attack opportunities. The reality is that significant cybersecurity incidents resulting in data breaches, disruption of services, and national security consequences occur with such regularity that policymakers are inundated with tactical demands. These demands pose critical questions about IT hygiene, cybersecurity best practices, and resourcing. This means less time is spent on long-term strategic issues, like achieving cyber resiliency in our digital ecosystem. Fortunately, we have seen some positive developments in the cyber realm as of late. Within the government specifically, which often sets the tone for broader parts of industry, we've seen the executive order on improving the nation's cybersecurity and the national cybersecurity strategy help best practices to go mainstream and organize government agencies around foundational cybersecurity policy concepts. Critically, we've seen some incredibly promising initiatives aimed at providing solutions to the ecosystem as a whole. For example, Secure by Design. Secure by Design principles have been developed by CISA to promote the notion of security being part of the design phase of a product and implemented by default. Secure by Design is a significant section of the national cybersecurity strategy and aligns with the goal of shifting the burden from would-be victims to those best suited to provide security. Recently, CISA launched a Secure by Design pledge, which CrowdStrike signed, to demonstrate measurable progress in securing products. Software supply chain security. The concept of supply chain security was propelled forward by the executive order on improving the nation's cybersecurity and the Office of Management and Budget's subsequent guidance to direct federal agencies to utilize software that was built following cybersecurity best practices. With regard to open source, the concept of open source software security recognizes that all parts must be secure for the sum to also be so. CISA has published an open source software security roadmap to begin to drive the community towards securing foundational open source software. The Software Bill of Materials, commonly known as SBOM, which due to its ability to illuminate individual software components, has become a potential tool in tackling software supply chain risk management. And memory-safe languages and leveraging memory-safe languages can preemptively reduce a common attack surface. CISA and international partners have worked alongside Secure by Design campaign partners to address vulnerabilities in programming languages. These developments set a policy foundation for creating a more resilient architecture for our digital ecosystem. They're designed to improve the quality of the materials we use to construct this architecture and to help us verify the source of these materials. Now it's time to focus on how we implement these materials in a resilient way. A resilient digital architecture should be able to weather a storm rather than collapse in the face of an incident. We must develop code in a secure manner and verify its progeny. However, it is critical, too, that we deploy software in a resilient manner, one that reduces rather than increases risk in our digital ecosystems. The through line of these initiatives is that they apply leverage to a weak or failing part of the IT ecosystem as it exists today. And from the groundwork laid by these initiatives, policymakers are in a good position to tackle the next emerging ecosystem-level cybersecurity challenge: concentration risk. At present, many government entities are extraordinarily reliant on one major vendor. Their IT stack may include just a single provider for operating system, cloud, productivity, email, chat, collaboration, video conferencing, browser, identity, generative AI, and increasingly security as well. This means that the building materials, the supply chain, and even the building inspector are all the same. If that provider fails, the consequences for its users could be catastrophic. If that one vendor security culture is inadequate, like Microsoft's is, according to the Cybersafety Review Board, then the situation is dangerous. The Cybersafety Review Board's most recent report covered the July 2023 breach by Chinese state actors, but a subsequent breach by Russian state actors that occurred in November 2023 went undetected until January 2024. This illustrates that the problems are entrenched and have the potential for significant consequences. When viewed as one-off incidents, these problems seem as if they come and go. However, the longer arc of recent history tells a much different story. A quarter century ago, the original edition of George Kurtz's book, Hacking Exposed, described the golden ticket authentication vulnerability. By 2020, a related attack, dubbed Golden SAML, permitted Russian state actors to gain access to sensitive government systems. And the latest iteration, dubbed Golden MSA, was a key feature of last summer's Microsoft Exchange breach. What began as an adversary getting the keys to a house has evolved into the adversaries getting the keys to the kingdom and ultimately becoming the locksmith. All the while, more and more critical services are unlocked with these keys. I was on this stage a year ago with CISA Executive Assistant Director Eric Goldstein, who proclaimed identity-based attacks need to be our North Star in anticipating adversary tactics. This remains true today. But with each passing year, the problem grows more consequential. Fortunately, the community is beginning to assess these problems in a more concerted way. Last month, the Center for Cybersecurity Policy and Law hosted a tabletop exercise, which we participated in, to assess how IT stack concentration risk might impact federal agencies during an attack. Unsurprisingly, in that scenario, an agency using one vendor fared far worse than an agency using a constellation of IT providers. That was one scenario, and as we all know, conditions change and our adversaries are quite adaptive. But it's clear that more rigorous attention is necessary here. So what can we do? How can we break this cycle? Unfortunately, as a security community, we fail to measure concentration risk well. The security community never really wrapped its arms around the monoculture problem decades ago when it existed at the operating system level. Now the problem exists vertically across the whole IT stack. With any risk, it is critical to have visibility into the threat. The status quo results in the threat of concentration risk remaining opaque until the adversary successfully infiltrates an entire IT stack. We now have an opportunity to start to take this problem more seriously. The next steps are fairly clear, as evidenced by a recent report by the Center for Cybersecurity Policy and Law characterizing the exercise I mentioned a moment ago. The Office of the National Cyber Director has demonstrated its ability to tackle complex issues and create results that have improved the way the US government manages cybersecurity risk. Given the ONCD's placement in the White House, it is well suited to task other federal agencies such as CISA, DoD, and GSA to examine and address concentration risk across all agencies. Any concentration risk effort would be complementary to ONCD's ongoing work, and they should collaborate with appropriate agencies such as OMB to orchestrate new initiatives. Given NIST's role as the authoritative developer of rigorous standards across IT risk and security, it would be logical for them to take action. They have robust processes in place to engage the community on a topic of this complexity, even those that believe that concentration risks in IT are overwrought. A thorough list of best practices, a framework, or controls document could help federal CISOs and IT risk managers address this type of problem. Implementation of such a framework or standard in the federal space would have positive effects for widespread adoption throughout the broader IT and critical infrastructure communities. Additionally, NIST already has concentration risk on its radar. In guidance stemming from the executive order on improving the nation's cybersecurity, NIST identified concentration of products or services from a single supplier as a condition in the supply chain that could cause vulnerabilities. Existing references are minor and lack definitions, though, so a more comprehensive look is warranted. Everyone, including organizations I've referenced today, should contribute to this dialogue by providing requests for comment responses. And for its part, the National Security Council could build on the previous cyber executive order, tasking NIST and other agencies to take action on these recommendations. Congress, especially congressional oversight committees, should investigate and assess concentration risk across agencies. Given the significant risk to national security posed by successful cyber attacks, this action is within Congress's purview. There's also a very critical economic dimension to this issue. As a community, we can't really price risk accurately until we've measured it, or worse, until an organization has experienced the outcome of failing to mitigate it. It's not clear that relying on one vendor for the entire IT stack is actually more cost-effective on a risk-adjusted basis. And even if that were the case on the margin, critical entities like government and military users would nonetheless have a reasonable expectation to invest in greater resilience. By virtue of their missions, some enterprises require best-in-class solution. Some enterprises have an absolute need for continuity of operations. To address this problem holistically, defenders must have a means to assess and measure concentration risk in IT stacks. We can no longer tolerate solutions or architectures that risk crumbling from a single point of failure. Ultimately, as a community, we should have confidence that we are improving the long-term resiliency of our digital ecosystem. We must not leave consequential, strategic policy challenges like addressing IT stack concentration risk unmet for yet another day. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. And I'll now turn the stage back over to the Washington Post. And it was delightful to be the warm-up act for General Nakasone. I know I'm looking forward to his session.
China is the pacing challenge of our nation. It is the generational challenge that we will address, our children will address, our grandchildren are going to address. We see it across the major lines of national power. They're diplomatic, information, military, economic. It's different than adversaries that I've seen in my 3 decades plus of service in the Army.
Hello and welcome. I'm Ellen Nakashima, a national security reporter at the Washington Post. Today I'm excited to be joined by retired General Paul Nakasone, who was the head of the National Security Agency and the Cyber Command before retiring earlier this year. He is now the founding director of the Institute for National Defense and Global Security at Vanderbilt University. General Nakasone, welcome to the Washington Post.
Ellen, thank you so much. I must say it was a little bit different to see myself in uniform on the monitor, but it's really nice to be here. Thank you so much.
Great. Great to have you here in civilian clothes. I wanted to start with a comment that Ambassador Fick made in the last session with David Ignatius. He mentioned that there are a lot of foreign actors active out there working on to sow divisions around the Gaza-Hamas issue in the United States. I wondered if you could to explain that a little, given your experience while you were still inside.
I think Ambassador Fick, first of all, has done a marvelous job of talking about really the amplification of what foreign actors can do with both message and technology. So we saw this in terms of everything post August 7th. Very, very little discussion about 1,200 innocent civilians and personnel that were killed in Israel and everything about what Israel was doing. This is the opportunity to take what is a story and then an audience and then being able to use tools that have an ability to focus it on the message you want to send. We've seen this, particularly, and the best at this are the Russians.
Were they active on this?
They were active. And if you take a look at Russian actors such as Latka, or what we used to call the Internet Research Agency, these are really the folks that understand it. I think this is the point, Ellen, that I would emphasize here, is that we think of cyberspace as being, well, defense and then offensive action, but really the in-between is so important because that's information operations. And this is what oftentimes has the largest component or lasting power with regards to an action.
What impact did you actually see, or could you see, between, say, what Russia was doing on the Hamas-Gaza issue and actual outcomes on the ground, behavior?
Let me just take a step back from it and this is what we were seeing after the invasion of Ukraine in 2022. This is Russian actors in a series of different parts of the world, particularly South America and Africa, where they're providing their narrative of the story. An expansion of NATO. This is, obviously encroachment on Russian sovereignty. And this is a completely different story, a false story from what is actually going on the ground.
And so as a result, and you were still inside at the time, head of the NSA, you all took a fairly, I don't know if it's totally unprecedented, but novel step at the time to declassify and release intelligence in advance of the invasion. Tell us a little bit about that decision-making process, how you came to it. How much trepidation did you have about taking such a step? And
it's the fall of 2021. We are watching the buildup of Russian forces on the border with Ukraine. We have a very, very good sight picture, as I would say, in terms of what their goal and what they wanted to do. And so the decision point is, do we start to release this information? And it's always balanced with, what are the national security objectives of our nation, but also our sources and methods. Because our sources and methods are the same sources and methods that we need to be able to provide early warning, protect Americans, and be able to enable our own capabilities around the world. And so the discussion goes for a period of several weeks and perhaps into a month or two about, do we release certain information about what Russia is doing? And the President made a very, very courageous decision saying, we're going to release it. And that was after a long discussion between policymakers and members of the intelligence community and members of my former agency about, can we do this in a manner that, first of all, indicates what the Russians are doing, but at the same time, doesn't prevent us from in the future being able to do that same type of work. It worked. And so what's the result? Built a coalition, disrupted an actor in terms of what President Putin was trying to do. He was trying to push this narrative that everyone knew was false. And last thing, enabled a partner in Ukraine.
It didn't prevent the invasion, but it helped build a coalition, indeed.
Right, but I would say that having watched the Russians in this space for well over 10 years, what they were saying was not gaining resonance up until the invasion of Ukraine. And this is the type of work that I think our nation has to do all the time.
So do you think that tactic could work with other actors, for instance, China?
I think it can in the right sense. I mean, it's not a panacea for everything, but I think it's something we always have to look at and say, hey, is the sharing of information, the ability to have a broader insight of what an adversary's goals are, can it be done effectively and safely?
So I also want to come to an issue that is on everyone's mind, which is artificial intelligence, and the news from last week that OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT, said that it caught groups from Russia, China, Iran, and Israel using its technology to try to influence political discourse around the world. And while these attempts to gain traction or struggled a bit, they still underscore the concern we have about generative AI. Talk to us about how you think we should understand the risk and use of AI by foreign actors in crafting more effective disinformation campaigns, especially as we are 5 months out from a very consequential and fraught presidential election.
Let me zoom in and then kind of zoom out on that question. Zoom in. I think the interesting thing is that OpenAI is able to catch the actors that are doing it and able to turn their accounts off. So obviously they're able to see this and working with a number of different partners, prevent having a greater impact on what these actors are trying to do. Secondly, from what I've read in different media journals, it doesn't seem as though the messaging campaign that was being tried by these actors really had any type of staying power. Now, let's zoom out. Why is this important? So I think the first thing that we should talk about is the fact that artificial intelligence has always kind of started with what's the harm that can be done to us? Let's think about also what is the good that can be done to us. The ability to utilize artificial intelligence to look at all of our code, to be able to look at vulnerabilities and be able to forecast vulnerabilities, being able to do this in a manner that secures our data, our networks, and our systems. And then the other piece that I would say is that as we take a look at this, the other piece that's really important is that these actors, they're using American technology, which tells me that we continue to be the leader in AI, and we need to be the leader in AI. So one of the things that we did at the National Security Agency was stand up the Artificial Intelligence Security Center. Why would we do this? Because we wanted to make sure two things. First of all, that these models, they're reading, understanding, and revealing accuracy. But the second piece is we want to make sure that American companies that have the lead in the innovation of this technology, I think the disruptive technology of this century, need to continue to have that wide lead on any other adversarial nation. That's the important piece.
How will this this AI center that you've stood up make a difference, a real world difference in terms of what these companies you're talking about do and can do? Are you sharing your own insights from the NSA with them so that they can improve their technology? Is it vice versa?
Yeah, a great question. So this is built on the idea of we at the National Security Agency have a role to play in securing ourselves, our nation in cyberspace. What's our role? Well, our role is really two-part. First of all, we do foreign intelligence, and we do foreign intelligence better than anyone in the world. And the second piece is we have high technical talent. So to your question, working in an unclassified manner where we can have conversations all the time. Hey, what are you seeing in this part of the world? Well, we're seeing this. This is the type of tradecraft. These are the tactics. When a US company comes up and says, hey, we see something that's anomalous here. Have you seen anything like that? Having our technical experts being able to say, yes, we've seen this before. This is what it leads to. This is the give and take. This is the public-private that is really effective. You say, well, what's your data on that? Well, our data on is we stood up the Cybersecurity Collaboration Center in 2020. And from one partner to now 1,000 defense industrial partners, we want to be able to get to scale. Scale now for us is 2 billion endpoints throughout the world that now have detection, protection, and mitigation if necessary, all in a manner that we can share this that's rapid.
What are some of the ways you can detect AI? Can you talk about that?
certainly one of the ways that we can detect AI is through the fact that we're doing foreign surveillance operations outside the United States against a series of actors and seeing what they're planning on doing. So that's bringing intelligence to cybersecurity, right? And then it's also being able to take a look at what's the commercial sector being able to do there, and are they seeing things that are anomalous that we don't see at all? That's the power of the private sector. And so being able to put those two together, I mean, that's the secret sauce.
So when you were being confirmed to become the head of Cyber Command, I think at the time, Russia was seen as the most important strategic threat, in particular to the elections. And today, and you said, I think, let me see, you said that the most important thing was to change their behavior. That's what you need to do. Has, 4 years, 5 years on, have you changed their behavior? Have you seen any material difference through your actions at NSA and Cyber Command?
I think so. I think we have. And I don't, I can't aspire this all to the fact that, hey, we were really, really good at the National Security Agency and U.S. Cyber Command. But here's what I would say. This is a domain that is incredibly dynamic. Technology is changing, the actors are changing, the methods are changing. But what we've been able to do is not what we had done in the past, which is, hey, let's kind of watch how this change and then have them steal our intellectual property, but rather, hey, let's be engaged every single day with a series of partners, persistently with the adversaries that are operating in cyberspace. They're changing their tactics, they're changing what they're doing, but we have to change with them.
What do you mean by interacting with them persistently? Do you mean taking them down?
It could be as basic as, hey, let's share intelligence with a series of partners to make sure they understand that foreign actors are trying to do it. It could be the fact that we want to work with a private sector company to provide them signatures with regards to the malware that's being done. It could be that, with the opportunity to send a hunt forward team into a country to watch the tactics of what our adversaries are doing and report on it to commercial partners.
And it could also be taking down networks or
it could be a series of disruptive actions that that are obviously run through our policymakers and then approved and then conducted in a manner that's reflective of our values and our means.
And Cybercom famously disrupted the troll farm in 2018, and then again you undertook more actions in 2020 around the presidential election, disrupting the Proud Boys or the IRGC campaign, and then again in 2022. It's become almost sort of routine, I would say, right? Is that fair?
So I think it's foundational. I'm not sure it should be routine, but here's what has changed, I think, Ellen, is that we've made a realization that we're not the only show in town. And we get a lot more impact when we bring other people to what we're trying to do. So when we bring the interagency like the FBI and CISA, when we bring international partners to it, when we bring the private sector to it, this is what really has been able to provide, I think, credibility and impact. This is what Russia-Ukraine taught us.
Tell us how you at NSA and Cybercom helped Ukraine counter, defeat, deter the Russians in cyberspace and in any cyber operations they might have attempted against Ukraine.
So the story with Ukraine does not begin in 2022. It begins in 2018, when we send our first team into Kyiv to work with a series of Ukrainian partners. Over a period of 4 different operations since then, you build a series of trust, confidence, and understanding of what your partner is trying to do. And so by the time the invasion takes place in February of 22, we have a really good understanding of the capabilities of what the Ukrainians can do. And kudos to what they have done. But it's the ability for us to bring our technical knowledge, it's ability to bring our tools, but most importantly, it's our talent. That's the difference.
So you help them in Kyiv on their systems, helping them shore up their infrastructure, move stuff off to the to servers outside Kyiv.
Not only that, but it's also, hey, we need to talk to someone that really understands critical infrastructure. Can that's not our necessary, but we can, obviously going back to the government, this is where we can make that handy. Nothing replaces presence on the ground.
Perfect. So, General, you've also said priorities shifted during your service, with China occupying more and more of your resources and attention. China has moved from focusing on commercial cyber espionage to disruptive activities. Tell us why, and what can you tell us about the evolution in their capabilities and their targeting?
when I first began in cyberspace a while back, I think the moniker that we put with China was they're a noisy actor and we can find them, and they're really not that good. Okay, then it goes to a period of they're stealing our intellectual property, and then it goes to a period of they're stealing our personal identifiable information. Remember the hack into the Office of Personnel Management in 2015? Then it moves into a series of different operations that really culminate last year when we discover them in our critical infrastructure. So that's a pretty big swath of change. At the same time, their leadership, their doctrine, their forces have also matured. So watching that, as a viewer and obviously a participant is like, okay, what do we have to do? Well, we have to make sure that we stay with them and ahead of them with a series of partners, a series of operations, and a series of different technologies that we bring to bear.
So why are they seeking footholds in our critical infrastructure?
Well, I think that as we take a look at the paradigm of competition, crisis, and conflict, they are looking for a means upon which they could cause chaos in a time of crisis or conflict with the United States. That has been the deduction of our intelligence experts, and I certainly support that.
What about one of the most popular apps in the U.S., TikTok? It's something that the many lawmakers on the Hill and even U.S. officials have warned could pose a threat to national security and Americans' privacy. Why? What smoking gun is there?
So, Ellen, you started the question with me with regards to Gaza and the amplification of information. Let's talk about an app that has 170 million users in the United States, where 6 of 10 adults are taking their daily news from it. But I would add to that, what are you concerned about? I'm concerned about the data. I'm concerned about the algorithm that's being used. I'm also concerned about the software. So to take all those three apart, first of all, your personal data that's being provided to a Chinese company that has a relationship with the CCP. The fact that they have an algorithm that can change stories to obviously fit the needs and the narrative of the People's Liberation Army. And the final part is, think of the ability to really, cause concern with regards to the malware that's even on your phone. Huge problem.
Is there any sense that TikTok has provided personal data of Americans through ByteDance to the CCP?
Yeah, so I don't think that my knowledge in terms of we've seen the actual orders from the Central Military Commission to ByteDance, but we certainly do know that in times of crisis or conflict that ByteDance is beholden to being able to provide information to the central government.
What do we know about how China is using cyber warfare against Taiwan, and what might that look like in the future?
I think that we first of all watch the Chinese try to use their technology and their tactics in a series of elections that the Taiwans have conducted. And for the most part, it has been very ineffectual. That's also the experience that we've seen with regards to the Philippines, where for whatever reason, the Chinese have not been able to necessarily get the right message, pick the right candidate, and being able to get there. But I think at the same time, what we have seen, and I think what a lot of experts have deduced, is that this is always an area where the Chinese are trying to think: is there a means upon which you don't have to, create a cross-strait invasion? Is there a way that you could perhaps take down the power? Is there a way that you could cause chaos that would influence a series of actors to behave differently?
Are they in Taiwan's critical infrastructure?
They are.
They are.
They are.
In their electric grid or?
Finance, electric. This is something we've known for quite some time. This is something that we have shared obviously broadly with the world. But this is the challenge that cyberspace portends.
Are you trying to help the Taiwanese kick the Chinese out of their systems?
I think I would just say that the big piece is that we're trying to make sure that the Chinese aren't in anyone's critical infrastructure. Why would they be there to be in the water? There is no intelligence value there.
Okay. 1 minute, I wanted to just ask, under your 6 years serving under both President Trump and President Biden, you witnessed the evolution in cyber firsthand. Can you tell us what some of the inflection points are, or some of the moments that really resonated for you in those years?
It begins in 2018 with this idea of bring a strategy, bring the policies and authorities, and bring the forces together to be able to have effect. And this is what led to the Russia Small Group. And then by 2020, we're looking at the importance of cybersecurity This is the rise, right? This is why we have a cybersecurity collaboration center. This is the whole idea of being able to share broadly with the public. Why is that important? Because you want to get to scale. You don't get to scale working with 5 or 10 companies. You get to scale with billions of endpoints. And then I think it's in 22, our realization that as the invasion of Ukraine has taken place, not only is the actions that we took initially to safeguard data, but this idea of resilience. This is what we saw, right? This is the ability to be resilient after your network has been taken down by the Russians.
So we talk a lot about the competition for technological and military supremacy. Where does talent come into the equation? We mentioned you started a new role at the Institute at Vanderbilt. Talk to us a little bit about that and the idea of winning the global race for talent.
Any of the issues that I recall over the past 6 years had fairly similar characteristics. They were borderless issues. The second, when I mean borderless issues, that they have impacted many countries, not just our own country. The second piece is that the way that you got to a solution was bringing more partners, not fewer partners together. And the last piece, it was really an equation of bringing the best people together. Let me tell you my experiences over the past 6 years. When I go to Silicon Valley, or I go to any of the tech centers in the United States, for the primary purpose, the majority of people I deal with are half my age. When I come back into government, Washington, D.C., other places, they're roughly my age. And it's interesting, the statistics show 15 times the number of people over the age of 50 than under the age of 30 are working national securities in our government today, 15 times. And so one of the things that was so attractive about going to Vanderbilt to stand up this new institute was, let's bring the next generation of folks that are going to be able to solve the tough problems. These are the people that, the policymakers that can code and the coders that understand policy. It has to be really an interdisciplinary approach. It has to be at a speed of technology, and it has to be with radical partners. That's what Vanderbilt brings to this equation.
And should we be thinking about recruiting top tech talent from places like China and Russia, for instance? I mean, Russia's losing some of their best and brightest.
So I think that we always take a look at talent throughout the world, right? And we're going to bring it, and we're also going to make sure that as we take a look at this talent, it's used appropriately. So it's a broad look at what we have to offer and where we can utilize it most effectively and safely.
Maybe I'll also facilitate a brain drain from some of these places.
Excellent.
Okay. Where does diversity come into all of this? You, for instance, are the first Japanese American to lead a major spy agency. Does that feature at all in your recruiting efforts, General?
When we took a look at recruiting at both our agency and the command, we always said we wanted to have an agency and command that's reflective of the demographics of the United States. And so as we take a look at that, we quickly realized that we have to recruit from all of the United States. We had to take a look at different parts of the country where we hadn't been before. I would give you one example. Today at our Cybersecurity Collaboration Center, perhaps the most forward face of the National Security Agency, every single day dealing with over 1,000 defense industrial-based companies, led by a woman, 60% of the leadership women, and just a younger demographic that's reflective of where our agency and where the nation needs to go.
So, General, you wrote in the Post earlier this year that what worries you the most is that Congress would let Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act expire. Despite considerable resistance, the tool was ultimately renewed for 2 years. So with that out of the way, what worries you most now about
I would just come back to talent. So we have incredible technology. We still have the nation that is the technological giant in the world. We have amazing tradecraft and what we're able to do. At the end of the day, it all comes down to the people. And being able to motivate those people that want to be able to work in this area and want to be able to serve our nation is incredibly important. Those are areas that we can never, ever give up on.
The House last month passed a provision in a defense authorization bill calling on the Pentagon to study the feasibility of creating a new military branch for cyber, a U.S. cyber force. What do you think of that idea?
I think it's one of many options, but not the right option.
Why?
Because I think the threats are too great, I think the costs are too high, and I think the time is too long to get at what we need to do, which is conduct operations every day. That's where we have the most impact. And I think creating a service is not the same as taking the authorities and the policies that are there today at Cyber Command to be able to do what's necessary.
And for the last 10 years or so, one of the big issues organizationally around Cyber Command has been whether or not to separate and have a separate commander of Cybercom and a separate director of the NSA. You obviously held the dual hat, as they call it. Do you think that idea of the separating the hats is now kind of passé, gone out of the question, or?
So I'm not sure if it's passé, but here's what I would say. If you want to operate with speed, if you want to operate with agility, if you want to operate with a unity of effort, having those two roles together is critical. This is one of the areas that I think we have been able to show with our operations, with our partnerships. And so I think that going into the future, this is a necessity for our Department of Defense.
Okay. And I want to just come back full circle to the election for my last question here. In 2016, the head of the intelligence community, the DNI, and the head of the DHS, Department of Homeland Security, called out Russia for, and this was about a month before the election, for interfering or attempting to interfere in the 2016 presidential election, in part by hacking into the computers of the Democratic National Committee. If something similar happened this year, where it was seen that Russia, China, Russia, whoever, was seeking to interfere in the election in a way that, seemed to favor one party or the candidate over there, do you think the intelligence community would call it out in the same way?
I do. I think, however, that the difference between 24 and 16 is stark. In 16, as this announcement is being made, nothing is really being done to counteract this. I know in 24 that there are operations ongoing all the time to make sure that we have a campaign to ensure a safe and secure election, the same way we did in 18, 20, and 22.
Well, General, this has been a fascinating conversation. Unfortunately, we are out of time, but thank you so much for joining us. And thanks to all of you for joining us, and this concludes today's event. For more of these important conversations, sign up for a Washington Post subscription and get a free trial by visiting washingtonpost.com/live. Thank you.